going to begin the second session of the day, Political Theology, Civilization, and Ideology. I'm Tim Luke from Virginia Tech, and so far we have up here Joe Bendersky, and we'll go in the order of the program, from Virginia Commonwealth, Dustin Byrd from Olivet College, and Melleuish from Wollongong. And I think Rocco's up there. Oh, who's the there? Am I stay there? Okay, all right. And Rocco's from DePaul. Okay, take it away. 15.
Hey.
I'll try what you have to say.
I'll move along.
Okay.
I'll speak as rapidly as Wayne did.
One.
All right. Does that count?
Yeah.
All right. It is perhaps quite appropriate that we open this particular panel with Ernst Wolfgang Böckenförde. For in his essence, Böckenförde is as eclectic and unconventional as the Telos Institute, the journal Telos, and most of its contributors. He's a devout Catholic who was greatly influenced by Carl Schmitt, but Böckenförde is a social democrat with strong sympathies for civil liberties and the socioeconomic responsibility of the state towards its citizens. His major interpreters argue the fact that he is at heart a liberal. Moreover, he ranks among the most distinguished German legal figures of recent decades, and he served in the Constitutional Court of the Federal Republic for almost 15 years, where, perhaps in the Telos tradition, he wrote a historic record of dissenting opinions. His breadth and understanding was also greatly enhanced by his original field of history. So his thoughts extend far beyond the intricacies of legal scholarship into the spheres of history and culture that greatly inform his perceptions and judgments. Now, outside of a field of specialists, however, he is known primarily through the Böckenförde dictum or Böckenförde paradox regarding the secular liberal state, a concept he introduced already in 1967. This is the most frequently cited theorem in German legal theory, contemporary German legal theory. It is through this dictum that I hope to merely introduce Böckenförde to you today, since I'm only starting my own preliminary studies of him, and thereby encourage you to pursue this thinker further. He offers a tremendous amount in terms of insights regarding law, religion, culture, and the travails of the modern liberal democratic state. First, I must acknowledge my debt to two scholars in particular, from whom I draw a substantial part of my understanding of Böckenförde, that is Tina Stein at Göttingen University and Mirjam Kunkler at the Swedish Collegium for Advanced Study. They have not only published widely on Böckenförde, but have published an English translation of his essential works on constitutional and political theory, and a second volume, on Law, Religion, and Democracy, should appear shortly. The Böckenförde dictum states that the liberal secularized state draws its life from presuppositions that it in itself cannot guarantee. So let me repeat. The liberal secularized state draws its life from presuppositions that it cannot itself guarantee. The dictum identifies a fundamental problem in modern state theory by observing that the modern secular state, in the words of Stein and Kunkler, cannot resort to imposing certain values or worldviews on its citizens without undermining the very neutral liberalism on which it is founded. If it did attempt to do so, it would be acting contrary to the liberal ethos of individual freedom of its citizens, particularly that of freedom of conscience. According to Böckenförde, The modern secular liberal state evolved in three crucial stages through which the state was gradually unbound from its original religious legitimacy and function, ultimately eliminating the unity of politics and religion. The first stage was the medieval investiture controversy over whether kings or popes had the right to appoint bishops within a realm. The second was the outcome of the confessional wars of the Reformation that led Hobbes to theorize that the state had a primarily secular purpose in ensuring the survival, security, and welfare of the individual. This secular purpose superseded the medieval notion that the state existed to promote divine law and the salvation of its subjects. For Hobbes, law cannot be derived from truth because, as the religious wars demonstrated, there was no agreement on truth. Instead, law was determined by political power. Thus, the Hobbesian dictum, auctoritas non veritas posse legum. Law no longer emanates from God, but from politics, and draws its validity from its conformity to the will of the sovereign. The third stage arose in the 18th century Enlightenment and related American and French revolutions. These events not only freed the state from religious sanction and authority, but equally important, implanted a commitment to human rights and individual liberty. This historic emancipation, however, also eliminated the very religious identity that had bound citizens of the Christian state together. It created the dilemma of the modern liberal state embodied in the Böckenförde dictum. What henceforth binds the liberated individuals together and ensures that as individuals they will actually adhere to and sustain the liberal state. Now, to Böckenförde, there are two primary necessary preconditions for the existence and sustainability of the liberal state. But so long as the state actually is liberal and secular, it cannot create or guarantee these preconditions. And therefore, these preconditions must be derived from non-state sources. The first source is an ethos within individuals that prompts them to regulate themselves and behave ethically without state coercion or sanction. That ethos allows individuals to make free decisions bound only by their own conscience. Inherent in this ethos is a recognition that the freedom of the individual is bound to the freedom of all individuals. The second precondition is that of a sense of belonging. It's a quote, concept. The sense of belonging within a community. Individuals therefore identify with it and are voluntarily willing to accept the validity of the political order and perform the duties of citizens. Böckenförde refers to this sense of belonging as the homogeneity creating force. Böckenförde speaks of a relative homogeneity that provides for a common consciousness of togetherness. In political terms, he argues that a democracy requires, quote, an implicit agreement on those things that cannot be voted upon. They are not subject to electoral majorities. They are off the agenda and cannot be contested. It is a common consciousness that cannot be created or imposed by the state. Instead, it emerges from the people when they ask, who are we, and how should we, and do we want to live together? Such homogeneity is relative because it does not need to be comprehensive or total. It can certainly allow for pluralism. Nonetheless, a minimal level of relative homogeneity is necessary to ensure public peace and the requisite common consciousness on uncontested fundamentals. It involves an unspoken consensus on society's basic values, about its way of life and its political organization. There must be an implied and trusted agreement about that which cannot be voted upon. He makes special note of the fact that antagonism, aggression, and violence that could disrupt the political order emanate not only from economic interests, but from the ideas and convictions that motivate people mentally. This elevates the necessity of a common consciousness and sense of belonging to a particular importance. Thus, this commonality can only, in a limited sense, be developed from rational sources, such as enlightened self-interest or economic cost-benefit analysis. Instead, he argues that there are attitudes and beliefs, pre-rational at their core, that sustain the political order and the social coexistence. These are not irrational, but pre-rational. What are the sources of these pre-rational commonalities? Quote from him: established mental traditions, practiced customs and ways of life, as well as myths, religious convictions, and not least common language and certain cultural consciousness. These sources create a togetherness and commonality that is also emotional and tends to assume some kind of existential character to affect the mind and soul of the people. He also points out that this togetherness of commonality simultaneously demarcates it from the other. And as such, the sense of commonality is a stronger emotional bond than a more universal commonality of the equality of humans as humans, which is far more abstract. Although not inherently aggressive, he admits that this particularistic commonality can become emotionally charged and turn to a rejection or hostility towards the other. Böckenförde provides several suggested sources for creating and sustaining this necessary homogeneity. These are not in rank order, nor are they mutually exclusive. Our religion, or various denominations, such as coexisting Christian churches, which today are no longer as antagonistic in the past, a shared consciousness of being a people that is shaped only in a limited sense by natural forces such as biology. Far more influential are language, customs, and shared awareness that make these people think of themselves as a people different from others. They share memories, hopes, pain suffered together, scorn endured, but also common pride. Commonality could also emanate from a shared political self-awareness combined with the political will to be autonomous. Finally, a consolidated, mentally internalized cultural heritage that refers to a specific way of life. All of these arise and sustain themselves not from an imposed state mandate, but rather emerge out of the self-evident things that are present within a human group that are affirmed unthinkingly and continue to be sustained. There is no guarantee, of course, that such commonality would in itself embody the necessary virtuous ethos required to sustain the secular liberal order. What then can serve as the requisite source of such a democratic ethos? Although the liberal state cannot mandate such feelings and behaviors through legislation or coercion, it can support and protect them. And here Böckenförde provides a few examples. First, really relevant, I guess, contemporarily, political elites must be exemplars of such an ethos, ensuring that their motives and actions must demonstrate fidelity to the laws and values of the secular liberal commonwealth. Similarly, the state must ensure that schools are institutions that develop the power of individual judgment. Teachers must be loyal to the basic principles of the liberal constitutional state, but not forced to adhere to a particular political conviction. The goal is to educate the young to become independent critical thinkers, emphasizing the fundamental liberal values of freedom of conscience and opinion. He also advocated an obligatory ethics class using classic texts that would stimulate thought and inner reflection. For Böckenförde, religion is paramount for creating this requisite ethos, and he strongly promoted a central role for religion in public life. He criticized the French state's policy of laïcité that completely eliminated religious references and claims from public life, and whose secularization relegated these to the private sphere. Instead, he favored a kind of open neutrality that allowed for religious expressions and references in the public sphere. In advocating for this open neutrality, however, Böckenförde was not acting as a Catholic or even a Christian partisan in the general sense. The state must not favor any particular belief or expression over another, including the rights of non-believers to unpopular religions. Indeed, from his earliest academic career, the young Böckenförde displayed a highly unusual independence of mind and argument. He unleashed an internal firestorm in 1961 in an article, a devastating article on the Catholic Church's compromises with the Nazis. In 1957, he had already criticized the pre-Vatican II position of the Church for its exclusivity and antagonism towards the secular liberal state. He argued that if Christianity is based upon the free choice of the individual to embrace Christ, only the secular democratic state can guarantee such free choice. The Catholic Church must accept the doctrine of religious freedom for all and reconcile itself to the secular authority of the modern state. It must accept individualism and pluralism. The defense of Catholic freedom of religion is premised on the necessity of religious freedom for all. Thus, the Catholic Church can play a role in public life of the modern state if it rises above its partisanship and pursuit of Catholic hegemony and be willing to concede that political power can be exercised by even long-standing ideological enemies such as the SPD. Religion can serve as the source of the democratic ethos by its moral teaching and practice as expressed in the open public sphere, not by cultural or political domination. Like the state, the churches cannot compel a particular inner belief upon free citizens. The state can compel citizens to obey the law, but not dictate that they have particular values, feelings, or act morally. In this regard, let me conclude with a rather ironic example of Stein and Kukler on the impossibility of the liberal state or the churches demanding that its citizens think in a prescribed way. When the basic law of the Federal Republic was under revision following reunification, someone had actually proposed a constitutional article that read, quote, "Everyone is called upon to show humanity and public spirit." Thank you.
Okay, next is Dustin Byrd.
We'll see how this works.
Good luck.
All right. Well, coming from Michigan in the Midwest, I will engage in some of this utopianism and say I'm very happy to be here among all the august scholars here today, and I hope we all can have a good, fruitful discussions about these things. This short paper came out of an experience that I had a couple of years ago. I was taking my family to a family vacation in Virginia, and we decided to go to Monticello and learn about Thomas Jefferson. And on the way down, we decided to go get dinner in the small little town right next to Monticello called Charlottesville. And we ended up being there for the largest neo-Nazi rally. We were there the day of the torches.
That was no accident.
Yeah, you know, I'd like to say I was behind. For some reason, every time I go on family vacation, I end up with some kind of controversy.
Great timing.
Yeah, it was. My background is in critical theory of religion, especially the first generation of the Frankfurt School, and then I look at Islam from that perspective in the Islamic world. But my doctor father is a veteran of World War II in Germany. He's from Frankfurt. He studied and fought on the other side, on the German side. And so my study of critical theory has always been rooted in this understanding of fascism, of Nazism, and here I walked right into the epicenter of it in Unite the Right rally. And I decided to take my break from Islamic studies and start more looking into the philosophical and religious foundations of this new populistic neo-fascist movement. So the title of my paper is called Political Theology, a Civilizational Apocatastasis, and it's on the right to return to religion. So, by the way, I have more than 15 minutes, so when 15 minutes is here, throw something at me. I'm from the Midwest. We're
Okay, I'll let you know.
Yeah. So the notion of apocatastasis is central to Western theological traditions, yet it has remained little discussed outside the small theological circles, especially those interested in patristics. However, in today's political climate, wherein the condition of the precariat continues to deteriorate, and the saviors of the precariat present various forms of nationalism as the panacea for the precariat's political, economic, and cultural relentlessness, the notion of apocatastasis has once again emerged. This time it is not a central theological concept, as it was in the more religious age, but rather has been translated into secular political philosophy. It is no longer reserved for discussions of eschatology and soteriology, but is now a matter of salvation within history. The Greek word apokatastasis can be understood in English as reconstitution, restitution, restoration, or a state of returning to an original or primordial condition. For the ancient Stoics, for an apokatastasis to occur, Zeus had to first contract into himself, into self-contemplation. This happened when the stars and planets returned to their original positions in alignment with the sign of Cancer. In his contraction, Zeus returns to himself and away from his own expansion as cosmos, which leads to the cosmos being reduced to its primal element, fire, and an all-encompassing conflagration, or ekpyrosis in Greek. After the destruction of the ekpyrosis, when Zeus projects his thoughts outward once again, all will be purified and reborn, the Paleogenesis moment, through the guidance of Logos, which is an emanation of Zeus. Among the Abrahamic religions, the Jewish rendering of apokatastasis occurs in Malachi 4:6, wherein the Hebrew verb shuv, meaning again, is translated in the Septuagint as apokatastasis, as the good fortunes of Job were restored after his tribulations. In the Christian Bible, the term appears in Act 3:21, wherein Peter restores health to the sick while speaking of the return of the Messiah. The church father Origen of Alexandria used the term to refer to universal salvation, or the idea that all sinners will return to the divine due to the endless mercy of the divine. Thus, salvation for all through the restoration of all to the divinely created primordial state. In Gnostic texts, apokatastasis occurs when a soul, which is considered the divine light, trapped in evil matter, emancipates itself by attaining secret knowledge, and is thus reconciled with and returns to the true God. Martin Luther translated apokatastasis in Act 3:21 as hergeweihte Werde, will be brought back. Such returning for Luther meant resurrection and salvation. In Norse mythology, a future apokatastasis, the Ragnarok, foretells of great battles, natural disasters, and the submersion of the world in water, only to recover with the survival of two humans, Leif and Leif Prosit, who will return to rebuild society anew from the ruins of the old. Although the majority of religious invocations of apokatastasis are strictly theological or eschatological, some, like Clement of Alexandria, are historical and or social. For example, Clement utilizes the term apokatastasis to return as regards to the Gnostic Christians, believing that one day they will return from their corrupted state and thus be reconciled to the fold of Orthodox Christianity. In this account, the term represents a hope for reconciliation and restoration of the schism within the world. Whether it is understood within the realm of theology or mythology, wherein it pertains to the actions of the divines, or a matter of human relations, the notion of apocatastasis is constituted by a certain logical structure. There is an original state of being, a primordial condition, if you will, which has been corrupted, polluted, or damaged beyond reform or repair, an apocalyptic destruction of that corrupted state, and the rebuilding of original state. This rebuilding is understood as a rebirth, a reconstitution, or restoration of that which was formerly corrupted, a new beginning modeled on the original condition. I argue that this philosophical concept provides the foundational logic of much of the far right's politics today, albeit in a secular form. While it is of no great insight to say that elements on the political right look to the past for future-oriented politics, it is important to realize just how much of the alt-right, the new right, even paleoconservatives and Eurasianists endeavor to root, their endeavor is rooted in this once religious concept's ability to recycle the West. Needless to say, paleogenetic ultranationalism is making a comeback, as I saw and experienced. Most of the West's retrotopian politics are devoid of explicit theological considerations, but they do appeal to Europe's traditional religious identity to advance their identitarian politics. By their outward appearance, these movements, whether it be the alt-right in the US or the new right in Europe, Generation Identitaire, or numerous anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim political parties formed in Europe, have little basis in Christianity, Judaism, and even European paganism. They are secular, but they do utilize the collective and nostalgic memory of Christendom in order to mobilize the masses in their identitarian politics. Despite their secularity, I argue that the religious concept of apocatastasis is at the core of these retrotopian political philosophies. They have learned the dialectical logic from the Hegelian left that has sublated the theological into the philosophical, attempting to undermine the ideology of progress fundamental to liberal and Marxist conceptions of history. Some of the key thinkers in these paleogenetic movements appear to be unaware of the dialectical logic they've adopted, while others are well aware of the sublated theological material. For example, the retrotopian Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin, standing on the back of René Guénon, Julius Evola, and Nikolai Berdyaev, has argued for the reversibility of time in his fourth political theory. He believes that the concept of time is a social phenomenon relative to each culture and society. As everything that is society-dependent is ultimately transformable, so too is time. To quote him, in the context of modernity, Dugin writes, turning back from one point in history to a previous one is possible. Dugin here rejects Hegel's notion of linear time acting as a vehicle towards inevitable progress. Rather, he argues for a Russian apocatastasis, a return behind modernity, both communist and neoliberal modernity, in order to produce what Nikolai Berdyaev calls the new Middle Ages, a restitution, restoration, a reconstitution of a holistic Russian time before the dysgenic tendencies of modernity, mainly Soviet communism and post-Soviet liberalism, fractured the Russian people's primordial connection to their primordial ethnic identity. Standing alongside Dugin in the primordial school of René Guénon is the nationalist Steve Bannon, who has popularized both the Hindu idea of the Kali Yuga, which he learned from Guénon, and as well as William Strauss and Neil Howe's notion of the fourth turning. In both ideas, time is conceptualized as being cyclical and earthly ages coming to their end due to cosmological logic. The last of the ages of the Hindu cycle, the Kali Yuga, the age of strife and discord generally associated with the disintegration of societal norms, values, and principles. As Guénon argues, the West entered into the Kali Yuga centuries ago, but its devolution accelerated with secular modernity, especially with the rise of globalization, cultural relativism, multiculturalism, and the reign of quality, or quantity over quality, as Guénon describes it. These dysgenic developments resulted in the loss of the West's identity as a distinct civilization, as it severed its connection from the perennial truths expressed through its own ancient religious traditions, both Christian and pagan. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip the bit about Bannon so much. So why is religious apocatastasis? Why are they calling for this? Outside of the very typical ones that we looked at already, where I mentioned multiculturalism, cosmopolitanism, Islam becomes a problem for these groups. And for the new right, an ekpyrosis that conflagration through fire has already begun to disrupt Europe's historical retirement. The most destructive part of Zeus's flood came not by water alone, but by way of immigrants on the water, washing away what's left of Europe's already fragile sense of self. The most powerful signifier of the West's collapse of identity is the Western Muslim. As a whole, Muslims who claim both their faith and their Westernality are the painful signifiers that demonstrate the fact that Western identity has lost its content and remains, as a result, merely formal. The newcomers, or invaders, as they're called by Renaud Camus, he doesn't like Renaud. I was emailing him and made some critiques, and now he won't talk to me. So, Renaud Camus, the author of The Great Replacement, he just wrote a book called You Will Not Replace Us. It was interesting to hear that after Charlottesville. These invaders, as he calls them, are not the non-identical who can, by way of civil law, as opposed to pre-political foundations, culture, language, shared history, ethnicity, they can rightfully claim their Western inheritance while still remaining identifiably non-identical in the West. In other words, due to Enlightenment concepts of civilization or citizenship, these invaders are both Western and non-Western. They are naturalized citizens, but not of Western nature. Yet the perspective of the new right, the non-Westernality of the newcomers, smuggled into the West via ethno-masochistic policies, as they're called, are replacing the remnants of Western identity with a culture that is incongruent with the West's traditional identitarian markers, its Greco-Roman and Christian heritage. This can only happen, they surmise, because the West has no shared transnational identity, as it did when Europe was still professing Christianity, through which it could juxtapose the West and the rest. As a means of defending the West from Islamization, a response to the immigrant-induced ekpyrosis has been advocated by certain segments of the authoritarian right, as it would aid in the return of the white ethno-states that existed before modernity, a civilizational apocatastasis. But is a return of religion needed by time?
Yes.
That's good. 3. Oh, I can do this. But is a return to religion even feasible in the thoroughly secularized West? And yes, it's a contested argument about secularization, but we can go on from that. Has not religion become neutralized as a historical force in Western countries? Adorno famously rejected such a return to religion in the studies on the authoritarian personality, negative dialectics, and his forceful essay on reason and revelation, wherein he writes on the return of religion already in 1950, that in the case, let's quote Adorno, in the case, best case, that is, there is not just a question of, when it's not just a question of imitation and conformity, it is a desire that produces such a pro-religious attitude. It is not the truth and authenticity of the revelations that are decisive, but rather the need for guidance, the confirmation of what is already firmly established, and the hope that by means of resolute decision alone, one can breathe back that meaning into the disenchanted world under whose absence we've been suffering for so long, as though we were mere spectators staring at something meaningless. It seems to me that the religious renaissance of today, Adorno says, is philosophy of religion, not religion. The key component of Adorno's argument here is that religion, at least in the West, is no longer convincing, but remains with us hypocritically. Because of the human condition, religion is the half-truth that continues to fulfill certain needs that burden modern life. Secretly, we remain unconvinced, or at best live with severe doubts about religious ideas, but nevertheless they function. They aid in the process of living a constitutionally damaged life in the nihilistic modernity. Okay. As such, the Apocatastasis, in terms of the secular right, remains secular. It is not a return to Christianity at all. It is a clumsy appropriation of what remains of Christianity's exoskeleton, its signs and symbols, without a conversion to its faith material. It is almost to say these Muslims truly believe in their religion, but we don't. However, we must appear to. In the end, it is merely a retrotopian functionalization of the residue of Christendom in order to preserve the idea of Europe as a distinct culture that is now threatened by liberals and the Muslim movements of deculturalization. This being the case, it is not the Muslims that threaten the Christian inherited identity of the West, but rather retrotopian identitarian politics within the West, as it undermines the best of the modern West. Individual rights, human rights, political freedoms, etc. while not recovering at all the good that was lost in the demise of Christianity, the sense of shared identity, enchantment with the world, sense of inheritance, etc. And there's a little bit more, but I've exhausted my time. So not very.
Okay. In this paper, I want to argue that our age is essentially an age of theology, and that this may well be a key element of its many discontents. While theology is an excellent human accomplishment, it is also one-sided in its nature, and one that leads human beings away from the world into the land of abstract fantasy. It is, I believe, a good thing that some people pursue theology, but less good when large numbers of people come to see the world in largely theological terms. I say this because it can be argued that theology is a particular mode through which human beings come to attempt to know the world can have unhealthy effects on human cognition if it is not balanced by other ways of approaching the world. What then do I mean by theology? In De Trinitate, Boethius, a late Roman writer, discusses theology as follows. Theology does not deal with motion and is abstract and separable, for the divine substance is without either matter or motion. In physics, then, we shall be bound to use scientific, in mathematics, systematical, in theology, intellectual concepts. And in theology, we should not be diverted to play with imaginations, but rather apprehend that form which is pure form and no image, which is very being and the source of being. Theology, therefore, cannot tolerate the imagination because its truth is fixed without matter or motion. There can be no playfulness, which is characteristic of the imagination, and no ambiguity. Theology would appear to be the triumph of Parmenides. True reality cannot have a temporal dimension. Hence, rationalism in both the victory of an atemporal and abstract approach to the universe and the establishment of a particular genre, the treatise, as a literary means of expressing that approach. Theology is concerned with pure absolute being, as far removed from the flux and change of everyday life as possible. In this sense, it can be characterised as being beyond the world. Such a place is drained of all feeling, sensation and colour. One is absorbed into the one. This is all very well if one wishes to live a life contemplating the divine. It is less helpful for the rest of us living lives in the everyday mundane world, something that Augustine understood when dealing with that seeker after divine perfection, Palladius. According to theology, the true or real reality becomes a highly abstract set of words, which are as far removed from immediate experience as possible. There is nothing new in all of this. It goes back to Plato and the doctrine of ideas, of which there are earthly manifestations but a pale reflection. It is at the centre of Western rationalism. This sort of doctrine had extraordinary appeal to intellectuals, to those who spend their days weaving ideas, symbols and concepts into beautiful, intricate structures. The concerns of Plato had little to do with the great unwashed, who generally lived quite harsh and unpleasant lives. The raw reality of the world constantly impinged on them as they faced disease, hunger, and the constant presence of death, watching their children die, and if they were fortunate enough to live through an age of peace, the constant possibility that all could collapse in a short period. One important aspect of the rise of the abstract model is the current decline of poetry. An abstract thought comes to dominate, so individuals become impatient with poetry because it is both playful and ambiguous, and they become even to the point of hating it. Of course, this also goes back to Plato, who wished to banish the poets from his ideal polis. The tragic poet opined Plato is an imitator, and therefore, like other imitators, he is thrice removed from the king and from the truth. Here at the very birth of the story of the West, we have an expression of view that's come to dominate the modern Western mind. The poet is too close to experience, and therefore far removed from the truth, understood as a highly abstract idea. The philosopher, the ideal personality for Plato, is a bloodless figure who rises above the emotionalism of poetry to the transcendent realm of ideas. The philosopher is a preacher creating artificial intelligence. Theology involves a highly unusual relationship between human beings, and the world once we consider it not just in terms of the knowledge it provides about the world, but when we understand it as a state of being in the world. The immediate world of experience of human beings is not particularly theological in nature. Theology is quite distinct from feelings of piety that the world very often instills in us. We relate to that world and come to understand it in a variety of ways, ranging from the artistic to the practical, to the scientific and the theological. We could not do so without the imagination. The multiplicity of ways of relating to the world is necessary for human beings, as they need to be as adaptable as possible in a world marked by constant change. Theology, of course, is founded on the notion that the changing world is not the really real world. Consequently, every form relating to the world that relies on an acceptance of temporality is by definition inferior to theology. There is only one problem with such an outlook. It is impossible to establish that the real world accords to the really real ideas that we have about it. To take an example, Rupert Sheldrake has challenged the idea there are fixed physical constants in the universe. He claims that measurements of the speed of light have varied over time, but the scientists tend to reject these differences on the basis that the rationalist universe constructed by science must have constants. In Sheldrake's view, the abstract model of the world, which has fixed constants built into it as a necessary feature, trumps the real world of experience and defines its regularity. Sheldrake argues that constants may not be so much necessary parts of the universe as habits that the universe has adopted. We can in fact never prove that invariable fixed constants are part of the real universe, as opposed to the model we have constructed. People try hard to bend experience to make it fit their ideas or models about the world. This is even true of thinkers who we assume are not particularly rationalist in their orientation, such as David Hume. Hume's moderation and sceptical disposition mask the fact that he is expressing the reasonable ideas of an Enlightenment gentleman who identifies such things as miracles as the sorts of things that only ignorant people, unable to govern their emotions properly, be they Calvinists, Catholics or Methodists, could possibly believe. However, miracles, along with other types of spiritual events, may indeed happen, but the Enlightenment has provided us with lenses to ensure that we can perceive them. I think it can be argued that Western culture has become increasingly theological over time, to the detriment of other modes of experience, including a religious orientation to the world based on immediate experience or piety, and in so doing, it's come to believe excessively in its own intellectual creations and downgraded other modes of experience. For example, poetry, which of course predates both prose and philosophy, and remember Parmenides wrote in poetry, as a means of relating to the world, has declined as an element of Western culture. There are a number of reasons for the rise of theology. The two I would emphasise are growing social complexity and the growing hegemony of the universities as those institutions that mould the way in which people use their cognitive capacities. Just as literacy changed the cognitive capacities of human beings, so have more recent developments. The overall tendency, I believe, is not only to shift the focus onto abstract models, but to make it seem that these models are the only way in which we can come to know the world. Ian McGilchrist has argued this represents the victory of the left-hand side of the brain, but that strikes me as a little simplistic. What it does involve is a downgrading of those modes of thought that McGilchrist associates with the right-hand side. It is as if all those aspects of what may be termed immediate experience are being put in their place by the now dominant theological outlook that dominates large sections of contemporary culture. It is better to know the theory of a thing than the thing itself. These changes have been coming for a long time. One thinks of the famous essay of T.E. Hume, in which he watches a procession while attending a philosophical conference in Bologna, when the announcement is made that an eminent philosopher is about to give a lecture on reality. What reality should he choose? At last, as he puts it, to my large regret, I left the real world and entered that of reality. In this regard, it's interesting, Hume's poems, he wrote a few, capture the immediate experience. I won't read the poem, but his poems very much capture that immediate experience. The bifurcation of experience is also important in Robert Musil's understanding of the other condition, our inchoate relationship to the world that is left as we become more and more scientific and precise. It does not disappear. In fact, it cannot disappear because it's part of our humanity, and I would argue essential for our survival as human beings. So how do we deal with it? Well, this is what Musil says. Bourgeois culture has reduced this other condition to the status of a dog-fetching intuitions. There are hordes of people today who find fault with rationality and would like us to believe that in the wildest moments they were doing their thinking with the help of some special super-rational faculty. That's the final public vestige of it, itself totally rationalistic. What's left of the drained swamp is rubbish. And so except for its uses in poetry, this old condition is excusable only in uneducated people in the first weeks of a love affair as a temporary aberration, like green leaves that every so often sprout posthumously from the wood of beds and lecterns. But if it threatens to revert to its original luxuriant growth, it is unmercifully dug up and rooted out. Reality, with a capital R, has become reality. Even Hume must forsake the joys of listening to a band to enter the dreary halls of the lecture theatre. And the only people who are allowed to enjoy immediate experience are uneducated people in the first weeks of a love affair. Of course, Western culture has become even more rationalist and theological since the days of Hume and Musil. I think that the ramifications are enormous. Jonathan Haidt has argued that philosophers, and the two he singles out, Jeremy Bentham and Immanuel Kant, were essentially autistic. This may have helped them to develop their ideas into precise abstraction. It indicates something about the dangers that lurk in philosophical abstraction. Remember, in the ancient world of philosophy was about achieving a certain state of being in bodily life. One can see the effects of excessive abstraction in the case of John Stuart Mill, who had a nervous breakdown, a breakdown, one can argue, brought on by an excess of philosophy for his education. This is how Mill describes his upbringing. My education, I thought, had failed to create those feelings in sufficient strength to resist the dissolving influence of analysis, while the whole course of my intellectual cultivation had made me precocious, and premature analysis the unvarying habit of my mind. I was thus, as I said to myself, stranded at the start of my voyage. Mill, as we all know, was cured by reading the poetry of Wordsworth. And he says, in the first place, these poems address themselves powerfully to one of the strongest of my political susceptibilities, the love of rural objects and natural scenery, to which I have been indebted not only for much of the pleasure of my life, but quite recently for relief from one of my longest relapses into depression. The power over me of rural beauty laid a foundation for taking pleasure in Wordsworth poetry. And I needed to be made to feel that there was real, permanent happiness in tranquil contemplation. So the more theological we become as a culture, the more our personalities are defined by a certain rigidity in terms of relating to the world in an abstract and theoretical fashion. There have always been individuals like this, and a number of them are perhaps necessary, but too many of them is not a good thing. The second ramification, I think, of this is that our political debates equally become like ourselves, conducted in a theological fashion. That is to say, they exist increasingly in a world of ideas that are thrice removed, following Plato, from the world of immediate experience into the world of the would-be philosopher kings. Empirical evidence is not essential to such debates. Even worse, advocates of these theological doctrines are now more renowned for their dogmatism than for any sort of subtlety. The only saving grace is they cannot physically burn heretics. The third ramification is in terms of the cognitive gap that has grown up between the theological elite and the ordinary person. This is well demonstrated by Stephen Hopwood's argument about human rights. And I'll take a quote. He says, a disconnect is growing up between global humanism with its law, courts, fundraising and campaigns on the one hand, and local lived realities on the other. It is a disconnection between human rights with a capital and human rights lowercase. Human rights, capitals, is a theological construct, while human rights, lowercase, is a basic human intuition that everyone should be treated fairly, what might be termed rough justice. The irony is that human rights, uppercase, often fails to deliver that justice. This cognitive divide is, I believe, an important element in contemporary populism. The intellectual elites that have grown up since the 18th century have always had contempt for what they saw as the emotional views of their inferiors, back to humans. This has been compounded by the growing dominance of the theological outlook of those elites, and also their growth over the last couple of centuries. Ordinary people are less likely to think theologically and to place greater emphasis on immediate experience and perhaps also have greater piety. In days gone by, and this is historically demonstrated, ordinary people were less likely to be upset by theological niceties than religious professionals. Theologians got terribly upset about the fact people had different views. Often ordinary people didn't care that much about theological niceties. So that's the final question. Then, under these sorts of circumstances, how does one create a dialogue between the theological elites and ordinary people rooted in immediate experience? Thank you.
First comment, Dustin's. I was very interested in your paper, and I just want to comment that I think that the reliance on this particular trope of restoration, true representation, etc., is a subset that populism. I know the problem with that word. I know, yes, we won't go there right now. But the problem, I'll just use it as shorthand. Not the problem. The phenomenon is that it always relies on historical cultural material, and if that kind of return of restoration is part of one's historical cultural material, then it is possible for populism, left, right, etc., to draw from it. So it's a subset of that, and I'll try to work that out a little bit tomorrow morning, which I know is 9 on a Sunday, but something else. Anyway, I have a question for Joe about what your perspective is on the paradox in Böckenförde that has been discussed in the generations since his writings, that the paradox with his notion of the open neutrality and that these foundational values have to be expressed in schools, public life, and so on, because the idea of open neutrality is exactly one of those things that liberal secularism proposes, which it cannot guarantee.
Correct.
And so if liberal secularism is based on certain assumptions, then it cannot tolerate in schools, public life, and so on, religions that do not subscribe to those foundational assumptions. And this has been beated around or batted around in Germany for the last number of years as people try to struggle with Böckenförde. It's a foundational paradox, and I wondered what your reflections on it.
So I haven't had much time to reflect on that but I do see the problem. I can try to speculate as to where he would come down on that. Is that yes, liberalism has it's open. There's an open neutrality to everything. However, he believes that again within a particular community there must be those fundamental agreements, and that comes out of culture. And so despite the openness, there are limitations that have to be. And these are the sort of, as you said, the undefined things here. And the state has the right to protect itself. Again, it can't create these feelings among the population, but it has the right to defend itself and that liberal structure. Yeah. So if there is a, I'll give you two sides of this here. One we sort of positive than the other. When it came to the debate in Germany over the headscarf, he came across very much as sort of a liberal on that. And he was critical of the court for its inconsistency and the fact that in some of the states, they wanted to give priority to expressions by Christians and Jews, but not by Muslims, on the assumption that this was part of the Western tradition, you know? And he rejected all of that. On the other hand, if you have radical terrorist or a religious group that is actually preaching against the continued existence of the liberal order, which he by definition says is one of neutrality and toleration, itself, it would have to defend itself, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's the bite the bullet moment when liberal secularism has to admit that it is grounded on highly particularist situated values, assumptions, preconditions, and so on. And that's what gets contested, and it's contested now also in Germany. Okay.
By the way, he also took a position on the Rus revolt there, and he was against that. The Rus, there was a law that forced. This was after the sort of phase of terrorism and in Germany, and a prohibition against anyone who sort of shared those ideas, sort of like a loyalty test. He wanted to be a civil servant or a teacher and so on and so forth. And he thought, yes, they had to obey the law, but you could not, preempt somebody in sort of prior conviction in terms of, or deny them a position on the basis of their political conviction. If they were a threat to you could show that they were a threat to the political order, but you could not simply keep someone out of public office or teaching merely because they adhere to particular ideology. But he has no problems with, however, with emergency situations. He supported the clampdown on the terrorists, even this whole idea of surveillance. Hope that helps.
Awesome.
Thanks for 4 really good papers. I have a question for Joe and for Dustin. 2 separate questions. Joe, you gave a great synopsis of Böckenförde, especially on this question of the homogeneity of the culture. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that notion. Let me say what I mean precisely. In your account, there's almost a kind of romantic organicism, this notion that there's an inherited culture and that it can't be created by the state. The alternative position would be one maybe from Noam Chomsky, sort of a manufactured culture, Adorno, culture industry. When I think about our American culture today, it seems to me that an awful lot is projected down rather than bubbling up. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Now, on Dustin, this actually might be sort of the same question. It's the Adorno moment in your paper that I'm particularly interested in, where you gloss his article and the claim that we can't really have real religion today because that's sort of dissipated. Once upon a time we did. I guess I'd challenge that notion. I wonder if religion, or at least Western religion, for at least 2,500 years, hasn't always been fraught by doubt. That in the competition with the pagan world, or the evidence from the prophets suggests that religion wasn't always unproblematically shared. The strength of faith has to do with the battle with doubt all the time. So I wonder if Adorno isn't succumbing at that moment to a kind of, here again, sort of romantic organicism that once upon a time the Middle Ages was complete, right? And it's only we moderns who have lost that.
Okay. So yeah, I think Adorno, it's uncontested Adorno thinks that, we're a thoroughly secularized society. And that shows up in basic things like, there was a time where if you asked the vast majority of people, do you believe in angels? It was like, yes, here, now, no. Do you believe in the end times or the judgment? Yes, at that time, now, no, right? You can go right down the list of all these things. So he would say that people, in many cases today, who would claim to be religions are indistinguishable, really, from secular people. There really is no distinction between the two. This happens to be a Sunday type thing, or when you go to yeshiva or something like that. But we live with such severe doubts in the reality of these religious claims. But nevertheless, they function. That's his basic argument. They function because we need them. But yeah, I mean, I think, I think there's, clearly, if you take like the Habermasian position that the West is on a Sonderweg, it's on a deviant path, that it, and especially in its institutions, are increasingly secular, that started maybe with the intellectuals and has moved down right into pop culture and whatnot. And as you said, with pop culture that's being pushed down, it's not probably enough from the top. That's all secular too. For instance, I take my students to monasteries in Italy, oftentimes, and my students are amazed at what religion looks like. They thought they knew religion, right, in America, and all of a sudden they get there and they see people in Padua, St. Anthony's Basilica, and Apocatastasis, you know what I mean? Or, they're in the tomb of St. Francis, just in contemplation for hours and hours and hours, and they thought that it was just a Sunday thing, right? And I think it appears just how deeply secular we are on a daily basis, that even small authentic forms of religion stand out so brightly. But yeah, I mean, Adorno, he has some romanticism, definitely. But even Habermas continues on the argument that, at least in the West, even though he says we're in a post-secular society where we're secular, but we still have religious, communities, and religion still remains important to some people. He says, but nevertheless, the secularization thesis continues to be right. That's Habermas's position, and I have a lot of sympathy for it. I don't think it's uniform all over the West, but certainly, if we take a Benjamin perspective, the more secular we become, the more religious we're going to become at the same time. Because that rubber band, right? You're pulling on one side, you're going to pull on the other side too. So in response to the secularity, religion comes back as well. So that's something Adorno did. I don't think he took out.
Good question. Because I had a similar feeling initially when I was reading one of those quotes, the longer version, and I thought to myself initially, this sounds like, Pater Jan from the Romantics of the early 19th century nationalists, right? And that, and I don't think that's the way he meant it. There's an indication of that, and I think here you have to distinguish between like culture and culture, right? And you're raising a sort of contemporary issue, I guess, of the 20th century, between the culture of the people that grows over time, right, organically, versus the manufactured culture that you see, especially among the young now, right, artificially. To what extent is that really unspoken assumptions, or if they really turn into the unspoken assumptions of the generation, should we really worry, I guess, here. I think it's a valid criticism, but I think what he's really trying to get at here is that issue of sort of unspoken assumptions. Certain values that you have that have evolved over time, find within certain communities, right? Those things which cannot be voted upon. You feel them, not necessarily in a romantic way, but someone mentioned in the discussion here about fairness, the general fairness that people have. It's not the intellectualized argument of justice. And so that's the way I would handle the unspoken assumptions that within a society you have to, there are these things that you cannot simply vote on everything, right? Discuss everything. Within the group, you know it. Now, of course, the problem with that is part of it's what? The paradox is the open-endedness of that. How do you ensure that will ultimately move in the direction you want of sort of democratic ethos? And that's what has to be cultivated, as opposed to and built into. I think his attitude, of course, is like Stein and Kuhn say, are already inherent. Not this Catholic tradition, but also these liberal ideas on his own part that he wants to preserve. And so that's the way I would handle it.
Adorno, Horkheimer, mid-60s, the discussion around religion. How does King get missed by all these?
How does Dr. King get mixed?
Well, no, more than that.
How did the black
You have from 1955 to 1965. King is arguing for a political theology. He's not a race leader. He is someone advocating a very deep, subtle, and complex political theology. He goes to Germany. He's invited to East Germany. Thousands of people show up in East Germany for King. Phenomenal. And so at some point, I'm sort of interested in getting some sense of how this amazing movement just gets lost.
They have no sense for it
No,
whatsoever.
Nobel Prize, I mean, how does that happen?
There's no sense for it. I mean, I read, when I read Adorno's essays on jazz, for instance.
We're not gonna start.
No.
Don't do that. Don't go there.
My undergrad was in jazz studies. I played with Miles Davis's drummer. That was my teacher. Really hard. And there's, if you read his essays on jazz, it's like he has no concept whatsoever that explains or accounts for the American tradition. And so I think in many ways, if anything had to do or was centered around the issue of race, it was out of his purview, right? There was just.
But I'm not even on race. Okay, I can get it. I'm a German dude, high culture, I think I'm fancy,
Right, it's the Huck culture, right?
I get that. But at the deeper philosophical level, just at one level, blacks, they have rhythm and they sing, right?
Yep.
We're talking about King as a political theologian. I mean, how more explicit? If you've read King, right, which is another description, right? Maybe they were waiting for him to sing a song or dance, right? So how does that philosophically, intellectually? I mean, you got this major thing, and the ideas. He's the id, right? So at some deep level, so I'm thinking Horkheimer, Adorno, this entire thing gets lost. And when you go back, I'm going to talk about this tonight, and you look at this issue of religion and the intellectuals in the United States, and there's partisan review in 1950, they had this big symposium where everyone is fantastically clueless, right? These sophisticated, upmarket Jewish intellectuals in New York with their little salon, and then, and they disregard all the United States. Forget the blacks. Well, blacks aren't quite, then we haven't reached the threshold of sort of human thing. So they dismiss all of the other dynamic things that are going on. But for me, philosophically, intellectually, unless King is just, the presumption is, well, there's this bifurcation between the logos, and how does that, at the pop level of reading the press every day, how do you ignore the religion that expresses itself with the martyring the girls in the church that went around the world, these children? This thing is recognized as on the cover of New York Times, all the major press in the world, and no one gets to my orthodoxy people. This stuff sort of the radical orthodoxy folk. I say, so I'm peeling around looking for ideas, orthodox. I'm looking for the King thing. Gone, not and this guy Gary Dorian, has written these two unbelievable volumes on the social gospel, where he peels, he goes in on the philosophical roots that are embedded in this unbelievable philosophical intellectual tradition of which King is a product.
Right.
And so you have all, so I'm just trying to get a sense, well, you know, with all of this sophistication, I don't want to say race, I don't want to do that. So it's got to be something else.
Well, it's almost you could say that they Santa Claus did before America's Santa Claus, Dr. King. I mean, we forget just how hated he was, just how transformative he was. And so by ignoring him, they Santa Claused him, they made him, you know, non-threatening and whatnot.
Right.
But it's really with Marcuse, when Marcuse brings in the other side of the movement, not so much civil rights,
Yeah,
but
well,
the movement
right.
with Malcolm.
Yeah,
That's when you get
that's right.
critical theory and Malcolm coming together.
Right.
But for like you said, you know, Horkheimer and Adorno, you know, there is no conception of this. This guy's a reformer. He wants to reform liberal institutions. He wants to reform a liberal state. He's not really attacking the mass extraction of surplus value from the working class.
But he's a socialist. I mean, if I bother to read King, he's easing up this with Michael Harrington, since he's not an idiot. He's not going to use the S word in Birmingham, Alabama, right, in 1965, because he's not a fool, right? So I get that. But for anyone that was moderately literate, you could read, and he's very clear. I mean, all of the March on Washington language, which is flying around, you're making good on the check and the promise. And the egalitarian project. So it's there,
Yeah, I think they would understand it the same way Malcolm understood the March on Washington. And that Malcolm famously called it the far side.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? That this is not the way King speaks. King in the church is a lot different than King in that speech. You know what I mean?
That's right.
For political reasons. And therefore, again, I don't think they saw him as really emancipatory, liberational in that sense. He's just going to adjust the liberal society and make it a little bit better, right? I mean, it's the wash machine of the socialist party, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Make things just a little bit better, but don't overall, undermine or transform the dominant economic liberal structure.
See, but they have to be more sophisticated than that.
I mean, that's just the
Right. Because Malcolm is talking woofing from the comfort of Harlem, at 125th Street in Harlem. You can talk trash about white people all day. I mean, you can break bad and talk all that stuff because he wasn't going to take his butt to Birmingham. And I say that as someone whose son is named Malcolm, whose father worked with him. My father worked with this guy in the Black Muslims, right? So I get that, but so it didn't go deeper because the Malcolm pose, I get it. The rhetoric, but that didn't go anywhere.
Right. Yeah, I mean, again, in terms of critical theory, it was Marcuse.
Okay, got it.
Who brought that in? I mean, Marcuse's idea that the revolutionary, side of the American class would be the minority groups,
Right.
including Muslims.
That's right.
Now.
That's right.
Okay, wait.
Dr. Melleuish, I was just curious, you mentioned a lot about sort of the power of poetry and how poetry as an art form sort of gets you around the too theological nature of a modern conversation. Just where do you think people have lost touch with poetry as a popular art form? Do you think it has the potential in that way, or are you merely using poetry as an example of something that can move us away from being too theological?
Well, if you look at the development of Greek philosophy is originally written in poetry. And then it becomes dialogue, then it becomes boring Aristotle, and so on. But I am very exercised by the fact that the poetry does seem to be dying in the culture. It's dying in being taught in schools. The kids apparently hate poetry in schools.
Spoken word, not true. In the popular culture, there's spoken word with poetry. That's not true.
I agree with.
That's just simply not true. In the popular
That's
culture.
not true.
To represent the same question, are there other forms of art
Rap
you
is some of the best poetry.
No, I wouldn't even go there.
I would.
You can do that. I wasn't touching it. How do you do rap and spoken word, which is the dominant
Poetry
cultural
slams.
form of the planet for all young people?
Can it serve a similar function to the way you thought of poetry, though, as reducing the too rigid theological? Can rap do the same thing that you think of formal?
It's actually doing the same thing, remarkably. When
agree.
and you've got Lauryn Hill. I want to get into this, man. So, but this is like my King problem, right? Where there's all this stuff going on. I don't want to say Eurocentric, because but how is this all ignored? We don't get King. on the poetry issue, which is fascinating, right? You have this phenomenal art form that is globally dominant, that finds its most powerful expression. There's a whole study on the use of rap, hip hop as a cultural form and expression of poetry in North Africa. There's actually a major study done by a guy at Columbia that goes into this.
Right. Marshall?
No, arrangements.
Okay.
I can follow on from that because I think it's the same point. I worry about everything everyone says because you keep on saying the culture or talk about whatever you're talking about, but it isn't clear to me by what criteria you evaluate whatever claims you discuss. I don't understand, you talk about Ratzing's very nice exposition, I don't understand how you'd evaluate his claims. I mean, I can evaluate his claims negatively, but I didn't understand how you propose to evaluate them. We can't accept that things are true because he says them. We can't accept anything the Pope says is Christian because the Pope says it, because we know from the history of Christianity they've said many dreadful things. We have to have very clear criteria. And if we have very clear criteria, it's not really clear that Ratzinger is either a major political thinker or a major social thinker. He's certainly not a theological thinker. I mean, he's too weak on fundamental things like, biblical languages. He doesn't have them seriously. And his history of Christianity is entirely fictional. He learned it from the wrong people. So if we apply rigorous standards, as we would do with people in 2019, I can't see how to evaluate even saying what he says. And I think a bit the rest for the whole of the panel, because, and this is Eugene's point too, I mean, where are we talking about? I mean, yes, people like Böckenförde have ideas. I happen to like them, as Joe knows. But how do we apply to India? Now, if you're not going to talk about India, fine, you're not an India specialist, but it won't do now to take America and Germany as though that was what rational people need to consider. We have to consider where most of the people in the world actually are. We have to talk about Africa. But if you talk about India, because we had a wonderful Telos conference there, which I organized, what you learn is that the American-German doctrines are vicious when you bring them into a culture that's radically different. Everything I love and you love is very harmful in India. That's what our thing. So if you're interested in Africa, then you have to realize these are not Western countries. These have pseudo-institutions imperialists set up, but they don't work like the US. They don't work like Germany. By what authority do you ignore where 90% of the people in the world live? It becomes a kind of narcissism. And I'm not saying I'm not narcissist too, because I am. But we have to consider where the people of the world are. And when we do that, we can't use Western political thought to understand their situation. So we're actually talking about a rather small number of societies.
Possibly, but does that mean that these societies, it's not possible to have liberal democracy in these societies?
No, I'm not contesting that, but that's where we agree on.
Well, I mean, they obviously need preconditions. I mean, are there
Yes, I wasn't-
preconditions there or not?
I'm not fighting with Böckenförde on the societies he's trying to understand, just making the obvious point that he's not talking about most of the societies in the world. That may be true for them, that's a totally impossible position, but then you have to do the research, clearly.
And the research question is the thing, because people are speaking in apparent complete ignorance of the world. And it's not as though after I conduct my research, right, and actually engage in a certain amount of conceptual humility and concede the possibility that these people might have an idea. Not too many, but a few that might inform the discourse, right? I mean, just as an intellectual matter, because in the absence of that conceptual humility, the important work that Telos does becomes confined to this room. And it never grows as a philosophical and cultural movement because of its conceptual and cognitive endowment.
Yeah, we have 4 minutes left. Sorry. That's a lot to cram into 4 minutes.
After this age.
Marshall.
Right. So I'm a little bit concerned about Eugene's blood pressure, so I really
I'm
want
good.
to address that.
I took my medicine.
No. I'm assuming that you are asking a rhetorical question, and what you are arguing for is that we need to read broadly. But the answer to your question, what happened to King, and then we can have lots of other people after that.
Sure, of course.
Right, is if there are no cultural receptors for something, it doesn't get received. You can write it, you can speak it, and it will fall through the cracks as a cultural phenomenon if there are no cultural receptors. And for a great deal of what King wrote, either it wasn't read or it was read and there were no cultural receptors for it. And there are other names that can
Absolutely.
fall, and we can go down
Absolutely.
down the list. And I think that your point is rhetorical because you know that, and what you are asking is to the development of cultural receptors by reading broadly and taking
That's it.
the breadth
Yeah.
into consideration.
Reading is fundamental.
Yes.
That's one member.
Oh, yeah. And Eugene. And the academy that we all live in and get paid by is not a meritocracy.
Well,
Right, so it has cultural receptors too,
Right.
and many ideas fall through the crack or fall through the crack for a long time, cracks for a long time, until there is a receptor for it.
The Telos state cannot impose its will.
Okay, on that note, let's have